Hi, welcome to week 5, where we're going to talk about inquiry-based instruction. Now, inquiry-based instruction is the process of having students do something, particularly in social studies and history, having students do history. Now, that's not typically something that we think of where you do history. Students typically often think of history as learning simply content or material, as opposed to thinking about doing it. In recent years, particularly with the release of the new social studies standards, and at the national level with the National Council of the Social Studies and the Iowa Council of the Social Studies, two professional organizations that promote social studies in education, the the up and coming thing is inquiry based instruction, where students engage in the process of doing what historians at the professional academic level actually do. And it is having students engage in the process of looking at, reading, analyzing, interpreting, synthesizing, comparing, corroborating primary and secondary sources to answer a question. That is what doing history actually means. But that can be very overwhelming and seem a bit whew when you think of all those things with elementary students. So, to introduce the process of inquiry with my students, I developed a lesson with my students to sort of introduce them to the concept of what inquiry based instruction is. Now, the problem that many people, students especially, have with history is that it oftentimes feels distant, disconnected. They fail to see connections from point to point, and it doesn't feel relevant. And one of the ways that we can make history more meaningful uh, and relevant is to engage them in history and an analysis of their own family's history. That feels more relevant, but then you take that and you apply it to what you're looking at in class. Now, you and I all know the power of a good story and the power that a good story can have. Now, what if we could take the power of a story, blend it with inquiry, and hide it in the guise of history involving family history and turn it into a lesson? That is what I have attempted to do with this lesson involving family history, the process of doing an intro to inquiry, and forming the foundation for what we would do the rest of the year with your students. So I want to do that with you today, but it's going to take some imagination and it's going to take some active part on your part, and it's more difficult to do via this because I don't have you in class and I can't do what I typically would do with my elementary students. Here is the scenario that I would set up for my kiddos, and that I've done this before. I do it with my on-campus students, and this is what I actually do. So I talk to my students. I introduce them to the concept of what do we mean when we talk about inquiry, and I say to help us do this, we're going to have a special guest come to class today, and they're waiting in the hallway, and I'm going to go get them. I leave the room. Outside in the hallway, I have a safari vest, a safari hat. I have a briefcase, and I put all this gear on, and I come into the room now as the guest speaker, but under the different role. I think I called myself Dr. Indiana Jones. Some of you get that. And I now act like I'm the guest speaker. And speaking of, Professor Henderson has left. He's going to go do something for a while. I'm going to take over. And you assume this role. And kids absolutely love this because if you play the role, you have to get into this. You have to be eccentric, and you have to be this actor on a stage who has now assumed a role and is going to teach this lesson. And I do this with my college students, and you see them kind of snicker, and he's like, oh, he's so stupid. And it's so embarrassing. It's embarrassing, too, in front of kids, but you have to passionately pursue this role. So that's what I do. And I set the stage with this, and I ask the students, and I'm going to ask you to do it with me, to pretend to go on a journey with me, and I have to take them there because I can't physically take them out to the site. I need you to do something, and I'm going to ask you to do this too. I need you to close your eyes. Now, that seems weird for an online thing, but please, close your eyes and just listen now. I want you to imagine that you have been invited on an archaeological dig in south central Iowa. And along with Dr. Jones, you've been taken out to go to this field in rural Mahaska County, just outside of Oskaloosa. And you're going to be going along to take part in an archaeological dig to see if we can find artifacts. So you go with Dr. Jones and you get in his vehicle and you bump down the dusty trail. You're in an open cab Jeep. It's the middle of summer. It's very, very hot. Sun's beating down. You get to the job site bright and early in the morning, just as the sun is coming up over the horizon. You hear birds chirping. You can feel the humidity of the day and you start to sweat. You dig for a couple hours and you find nothing, which is kind of typical of an archaeological dig. You take lunch, sit underneath a shade tree, listen to the birds sing again, hear some slight breeze picks up, relieving some of the humidity and the heat of the day. You go back out and you dig the rest of the afternoon and you find nothing. You go the next day, the same thing. You dig all day in the heat of the day as you sweat and dig, and you find nothing. Finally, 6 days later, on the last day of the dig, it is late afternoon. It's getting to the hour of 4:30. You know at 5 o'clock you can go. It's the heat of the day. There's no breeze, and it's a high heat index, and you are sweating and you are tired. You stick your shovel into the ground one last time, and you hit something hard. So your heart begins to quicken. You get out your little brush, and you start to brush away what you see is potentially to be what looks like a rock. And you start to dig. And you come across the most amazing thing you've ever seen. So you stick your shovel in one more time, and lo and behold, you find something else. You take your little brush away, and you start to brush the dirt away. You wipe your brow as you start to sweat, and you call Dr. Jones over. And you say, Dr. Jones, I need to show you something. Dr. Jones peers over the edge of the hole where you've been digging, and you show him this. I need you to open your eyes. What you have found are these two rocks. You have no idea what they are. We're not sure even what we're looking at. You feel the coarseness and the weight of these. You see the thickness, and you begin to observe, and you begin to wonder. What I would like you to do now is, as you observe these, pause the video for 2 minutes and do the following. Write down questions that come to your mind as you view these rocks. Do that now. Pause it and write down a handful of questions. Take no more than a minute, and then come back. Now, hopefully you've paused and you've played again, and you have written down questions about these two rocks. Now, what kinds of questions do you suppose you would begin to ask? What I call this in inquiry with my students, this is the wonder phase, where I just wonder. There's no such thing as a bad question when you've been presented with an unknown situation. Some of the typical questions that people would simply ask, they seem very obvious, but these are good questions because remember, you're teaching kids how to do inquiry. So some of the most obvious ones would be, what are they? Another one would be, how old are they? Where did they come from? Who made them? What were they used for? And some kids ask, what are they worth? Now, what I did with my students is we asked all these questions. We wrote down a series of questions to wonder about these rocks. Then we said, okay, we have these questions. Now, where could we go to begin answering these types of questions? And kids proposed different ideas. And we went to these sources to try to find answers to these questions. Then I said, well, are there other, what do we suppose, let's present some potential answers to these questions that we've asked based upon research that we've done. And the students, we actually did this. We spent a day or two researching this stuff. And then somebody said, and I asked, okay, well, if we have a lot of these unanswered questions and we're not quite sure, what else could we do? And a student raised his hand and said, well, could we contact some experts? And I said, that's a good idea. who could we potentially ask? And I remember I was still in character, and one kid goes, "You!" And I'm like, "Yeah, you're right. As an archaeologist, I guess you're right." But I said, "But if you weren't going to ask me, who are some other people?" And someone said, "Well, an archaeologist." So what we did is we typed up a letter to different archaeological offices asking these questions. And it was fascinating. These offices actually gave us answers within days. And what I did is I sent it to 3 different offices to try to get answers to these questions about these axe heads. Came back as this: these are not just rocks; these are axe heads. And this is what the archaeological office said. And this is where it blew my students' minds. The first question was, what are they? Well, they're an axe head. The next question was, how old are they? Based upon the evidence of all 3 archaeological offices in Iowa, they estimate that these axe heads date from somewhere between 3,000 and 6,000 BC. I'm going to say that again. These axe heads were created and used somewhere between 3,000 and 6,000 BC in central Iowa. Is that not fascinating? They said these axe heads, people thought maybe they were used for war, for fighting. They were actually not used for war and fighting. They were used for grinding and chopping and grinding up like different grains and different types of foods. If you can see on this one, you can see how there's a slight groove to it. They would have been strapped to a branch like this with rope or some type of root around it to hold it on, and then they were used for chopping and mashing. Some of the other questions that we had asked was, okay, well, who created them? The ancient peoples of central Iowa would have created these. I don't know specifically if they have a group of people from that. I don't remember from the email. And I forget, they were certain types of rocks. So this was a lesson that I did. And then one of the students asked, well, where did you get them? And I said, well, I need to tell you a story. So this is where I told them the story. In 1901, my great-grandfather began farming 5 miles southeast of Pella. That is in central Iowa, south central Iowa in Marion County, right on the edge of Marion and Mahaska County. And one night there was a big rainstorm, and the creek came out and flooded his field. And he wanted to walk to see how many rows of corn he had lost. So my great-grandpa was walking his field, and he came to the creek bank, and he saw something sticking out of the bank. So he went home, and he got a spade. He came back, and he started to dig. And believe it or not, the story that he told my grandpa and that my grandpa told me is that he came across human remains buried in the creek bank. Next to the human remains, he found these 2 axe heads. And he didn't think anything of it. And that day, they said that they would find artifacts all the time, and people didn't think anything of it. He took them home, put them in a box, left them in the farmhouse for close to 80 years. They stayed in this farmhouse, which my great-grandpa had lived in. My grandpa lived in, and when my grandpa moved from the farm, they had a big farm sale. I was in high school at the time, and I was rummaging through some boxes, and I came across these, and this is in a dusty old box underneath a pile of old tools. And I said, Grandpa, what are these? And he said, rocks. I said, they don't look like just rocks. He goes, well, and I said, well, where did you get these? And he told me that story. And I said, well, do you know anything about them? He goes, nope, sat in a box in the attic my entire life. So he goes, you want them? I was like, yes, I would like these. And it was about that, as I became a history teacher, then years later, I thought, I wonder what these are. I never did do anything with them either, which is sad. But as a teacher, then I wondered, okay, could I use these for something in class? And I looked into it, and I thought, we could create this lesson. And it's a simple, easy, hands-on way to introduce the idea of here's something that we don't know what it is, so we have to ask a question. Now, how do we go about answering this question in a professional manner? And you work the students through the process of doing history. So you might be saying to yourself, well, that's a really cool story, Steve, but I don't have, 6,000-year-old axe heads from my family farm in 1901. That's a great point. So where do you go for this type of thing? there is a great organization through the University of Iowa, and they're called Traveling History Trunks, where they have replicas of primary sources and archaeological artifacts that you can go to and check out from the University of Iowa. They're called Traveling Trunk. I would like do a Google search, University of Iowa Traveling History Trunks, and it'll take you to the website. They've got, I want to say, a dozen or more different trunks based upon different eras of history. They're pretty cool. I got one brought here last year, and it had all sorts of neat Native American artifacts in it, and they can be fun, interactive tools. I could especially see that being very valuable at the elementary level, particularly with children. So that's what historical inquiry is. It's the process of doing. It is the process of having kids engage in what professional historians do. History is so much more than simply learning facts. And history now is not about learning these facts, but it's about doing the skills to take these skills and apply. And if you can do that and engage your students and couple it with a story, I think you can be and create a very engaging classroom where kids can begin practicing the process of doing history. Thanks for watching.